Before we get going into your Hockey IQ podcast episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Rapid Shot. Rapid Shot is the smart shooting lane. It's like a batting cage for hockey players. Very cool. Tracks your shot in 3 ways: accuracy, shot speed, and reaction time. Easy to use. Actually, I used it when I played and was growing up. Very easy. Simply scan your phone in, select your settings, and start shooting. You can see your stats on the app and online. You can check them out at rapidshot.com. Great small business. I actually grew up with one of the owner's sons and have played with all the family members by now, just in local pickups here in Ohio. Very cool local business. Awesome product. I love it. I know quite a few NHLers have them in their homes. A lot of D1 programs have it at their rinks. So you have to check this out. Rapidshot.com. Check it out. Rapid Shot, thank you so much for sponsoring our podcast. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring on Joel Jackson. Joel is like on the level of Anthony Donskov, maybe eclipsing him ever so slightly in the strength and conditioning world for hockey. So gotta say, really surprised when he finally said yes to coming on the podcast. So Joel, thanks for coming on.
Oh yeah, no problem. It's great to be here, Greg. And yeah, Anthony's still light years ahead of me, so don't put me in that league quite yet.
I mean, one guy works with an NHL team, the other just hangs out in Columbus with, Coach Revak over here. So one's a cool guy.
Yeah, he's got his PhD though, and he's written 2 books. So I don't have that on my resume yet.
Well, does he have a weight room named after him? Because I believe you do.
Yeah. No, I do have the weight room in my very tiny hometown in northern Manitoba is named after me. So it's definitely one of my bigger claims to fame.
Well, usually I feel like it's presidents, former NHL stars, those are the guys that get their names on buildings or in rooms. So curious to hear the story of what kind of impact you had, because clearly it had to be something great.
Yeah, it's funny. It's kind of where it all started for me in like kind of the strength training, resistance training world for sure. So just growing up in a really small town called Snow Lake, Manitoba. Any of your listeners that are familiar with Canada or the province of Manitoba, my hometown is a 7.5-hour drive north of Winnipeg. So it is way up there. And so yeah, just a really small-minded community. Grew up playing hockey and everything like that. And as I got into the junior high school years, me and a few of my friends were, obviously looking for a place to train because we didn't have a fitness center or a gym per se in the town. So we got access to a classroom in the school that wasn't being used, and basically kind of looked around town for people to donate equipment. There was some equipment that the school had. My dad, who was the maintenance supervisor at the school, built the squat rack out of 2x6s, and I bolted it and attached it to the wall. So you can imagine what this place looked like, right? It was you had to be pretty creative with some of the stuff you were doing, but yeah, it was really cool. It was where it all started for me. Kind of shaped me as a young man and gave me appreciation for work ethic and the kind of influence that weight training can give you as an athlete. So and after I'd left to play junior in college and everything like that, and one of the teachers that was there during my time ended up getting some funding to kind of refurbish the weight room and paint it and get a bunch of nice new equipment in there and everything like that. And he decided to name it after me. So yeah, the Joel Jackson Community Weight Room. It's kind of cool. I have an older picture of me in front of it. I haven't been back in a while. I need to get back in there to a more up-to-date picture. But yeah, it's kind of a cool story about me.
That's awesome. I feel like you need to go back, just set some like weight room records and then leave. Just to cement your place. Like, you can never take this weight room away from me. Like, my name needs to be plastered on this forever.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of strong kids that I know recently were working out in there, so I might not be able to take any records, but my name on the wall is good enough for me.
That's good. Well, getting into the specifics here of doing your job, obviously I try to pack as much value into these podcasts as humanly possible.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the bench press. I have all my S&C people on, and I have to ask, should it be a staple in the diet of a growing young hockey player?
Um, it's kind of tough to say, right? Because like it's like a lot of times it's going to depend on the individual, but the exercise itself is good, right? It's a multi-joint upper body exercise that allows you to put a significant amount of load, and it can allow you to get really good strength gains. So if you have an athlete that doesn't have any restrictions with their shoulder, no previous injuries around that upper body shoulder area especially, it's probably going to be a perfectly fine exercise. And where you run into issues with it is with some of those athletes that have had AC separations, different types of shoulder problems, where if there's pain in the movement, then 100% you need to find something else to do to target their upper body. Another big problem that, and this is probably me guilty back in the day in Snow Lake when I was first starting to work out, where that's, you're just doing way too much pushing over pulling, right? And you're kind of running an unbalanced program. And that's where you can run into the postural problems of the athletes doing the rounded shoulders, because the anterior part of their upper body is way more developed than the posterior part. So that's one of the biggest things that needs to be kept in mind, is that you have to have a balance between your pushing and pulling when you're in the weight room. And oftentimes with athletes nowadays, and everybody, we're spending a lot of time sitting and kind of hunched over in a poor posture. Like, more pulling than pushing is usually beneficial for the average guy or average female, whoever it is that you're training. But yeah, the bench press itself, it's like a lot of athletes love it, and if they like it and there's no pain in it, go for it, right? I love it. It's a good exercise. I like doing it myself still, right? And my shoulders are a little cranky, so I kind of have to change it up a little bit. Incline bench press is a little bit better than flat, but yeah, it really depends on the situation.
Perfect. I was going to say, now you can tell us about all of the guys and how they rank in the gym for the Oilers, right? No, not a chance. But you bring up a great point, and something I really want to dive into, and it's the idea of having good quality posture, and the fact that developing these pulling really helps develop your back, muscles, spine, all that. Um, Again, you've got all the complex terms and the actual definition, so correct me at any time. And really helping out with the idea of the posture being a key element, just with daily living, but also when it comes to performance and doing technique, how important posture is and how often I see it overlooked when we talk about doing skill work, skills coaches, whatever it may be, especially with skating, like how important the posture is. So you're telling me and the listeners that we need to do more pulling per day. So a rowing machine would be good, things like that.
Yeah, and like, just thinking in like, hopefully most people do have resistance training in their kind of exercise routine, because you know just our everyday average Joe's, as you age, it's like, if you want to actually change your body composition, if you're just out there running or cycling or just doing cardio, that's not going to change it, right? It's resistance training that's gonna actually change how you look, right? So the biggest thing is, yeah, just making sure that you have a good, a good amount of pulling in your program, whether that be horizontal pulling, things like that. Could be seated rows, like on a cable machine works fine, dumbbell 3-point rows, anything like that. And then you're pushing, you're doing it. Sorry, I should go back to vertical pulling as well. So that would be like our chin ups and our pull ups and our lat pull downs, and just making sure you have a balance with that, right? And another thing too is just to be conscious of your posture with everything that you're doing, right? So like me, I should kind of sit up here right now and pull the shoulder blades back, push the chest out a little bit, instead of hunching over. And Chad Drummond is the head strength and conditioning guy that I work with here, and it just so happened that one day he sent me on one of the road trips, and we came back as a team, and he had got standing desks for him and myself. So, and they're adjustable, so you can bring them down and sit, or you can bring them up to stand, and like stuff like that is great, right? If you can spend a little bit more time standing, or just spending more time throughout the entirety of your day in a good posture, is probably going to be one of the key factors for you, right? The no matter who you are, athlete or not, it's like back pain is something that you want to avoid at all costs. And, I'm speaking from a place where I don't have a lot of experience with back pain, luckily, right? But it is something when you talk to people that have it, it's crippling, right? And focusing on your posture and having a good, well-balanced resistance training routine as part of your kind of daily life is something that will help you avoid that. So very important.
Resistance training. So, all right, I'm going to go nail my running shoes to the floor.
I'm not saying running's bad. I still do a lot of it, right? But just, that balance, right? Everything's got to be balanced.
Well, I just want to, just fight against that resistance of the nails, on the floor. It'd be perfect for me. Yeah. So you're a well-researched person here. So I know you did your thesis on the time motion analysis.
Yeah. You just say TMA for short.
Yeah. Okay. That's heart rate response to university hockey games. I'm an idiot. Please help me out. What does that mean? What did you find?
Yeah. So when I did my my master's degree at the University of Alberta, I decided to do it on time motion analysis and heart rate response in the sport of hockey. And one of the biggest influences on that was my supervisor that I had at the time. His name was Dr. Gordon Bell, and he had done time motion research in a few other sports, including rugby, and I'm forgetting a couple of the other ones off the top of my head. But either way, when we look back at the research at that time, the last kind of true time motion analysis study that was done in the sport of hockey was in the 70s by Dr. Howie Green out of Ontario. I can't remember what school he was at, but either way, it was something that, definitely needed to be updated. And, what we ended up doing there is we formed 10 different movement categories. And, if this was, over 10 years ago now, so the technology that we were using, it probably would be, there's a much better way to do it now. And since then, somebody has published more research using catapult units that's a little bit more accurate. But what we did was more manual notation. So I used a software program called Dartfish, and we basically, watched the games in Dartfish and coded movement patterns for each player. So we had forward gliding, forward moderate skating, forward sprinting, and forward starting. So starting just being from a stationary stance into an explosive sprint. And then those same 4 categories for backward skating. And then the final 2 were standing or stationary activity, and then struggling for a puck, which would be just engaging with an opponent in the corners in front of the net, anything like that. So what I had to do for my thesis is basically watch 3 hockey games over and over and over again for every single position on the ice. So I know those 3 games from the female Pandas hockey there like the back of my hand. But basically what we ended up finding was that the majority of the time is spent in the forward gliding and the forward moderate skating movement categories, right? Where everything else is quite low. So basic 36% of the time spent forward gliding, 31% forward moderate skating, 10% backward gliding, 7% standing, 6% struggling, 5% forward maximum skating. So only 5% of the game spent sprinting, and then 3% backwards moderate skating. And then things like backwards sprinting and stuff like that, it was negligible how much time was actually spent in those movement categories. And then some of the other things that came up were obviously like defense spent more time backwards skating than forwards, which you can kind of expect, and forwards spent a little bit more time sprinting forwards than defense. And that just comes with the territory of those positions, obviously. And then when we looked at the heart rate response, that was another thing that was, not necessarily surprising, but very big heart rate responses during shifts. So for an average peak heart rate response for the players was 96% of their max heart rate during a shift. So, they're up in like the 180s, 190s, depending on what these players' maximum heart rates were. And then the average heart rate for a shift in its entirety was 92% of the max. So very, very high heart rates, just as a testament to the cardiovascular demand of the sport that sometimes gets underplayed out there. And then another thing that we looked at was like a work to rest ratio. And then we looked at two different versions of that. So an on ice work to rest ratio, where how much time is the player spending in low intensity movement categories compared to high intensity categories. So what we found there was at about a 1 to 1.6 work to rest ratio, right? So when they're for every 1 second of work, they're about 1.6 seconds of rest. And then for the game work to rest ratio was basically just like how much time are they spending on the ice compared to the time on the bench, was 1 to 3.7. So every minute on the ice, or every minute long shift was 3.7 minutes on the bench. So quite a bit of valuable information that came out of it. And what we ended up doing is we published an article using the data that I collected for my thesis. And then we also published an article using similar data that was collected with the male counterpart for their varsity data as well. So a really good learning experience. One of the big things, with the heart rate, is it just a testament to the importance of aerobic fitness in hockey, and just being able to recover between shifts when you're reaching that high of a heart rate is obviously a very important piece to the game in order to be successful, especially for the players that are logging the big minutes and are going to be on the ice in all situations of the game. Their ability to recover is instrumental in being successful out there. So
all right, that was a lot. Love it. I'm curious now. I mean, this can take you many different routes. Who sprints more? Should we spend more time on the forward glide? Because that's an important movement pattern, obviously, for using it a ton. But I think where I want to go with this is, how do we effectively raise cardio, or the ability to get our heart rates up there or to a higher max? Am I thinking about that properly? And then the second side of that would be ability to recover well. So obviously you want to be available to go for that next shift and continue to assert yourself.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different things that can come into the equation here. So it's like, if a player is a more efficient skater than another, right? Like they're going to be able to, they're not going to utilize as much energy within a shift, and therefore they'll be able to recover quicker. The other thing too is, like, I don't want it to make it seem like I'm arguing that like aerobic fitness is like the upper echelon and the most important quality for a hockey player, which I don't believe it is. I do believe it's important though. And I do believe that, players need to have a level of aerobic fitness that's good enough. And where it can kind of get lost in translation there is that, so if we look at a VO2 score, so a VO2 max is something that would be considered one of the gold standards of evaluating aerobic fitness. And, they do it at the NHL combine. And, like a good score for a hockey player would probably be in the range of 55 to 60 milliliters per kilogram per minute is what the unit is measured in. Anything higher than that, it's probably going to mean that they're spending maybe a little bit too much time training that quality and potentially taking away from other things, being it like strength and power and different that. And I've seen it happen with athletes where they've kind of go a little bit too far down that route, and they spend too much time running or cycling in the summer, and when they come back and get into training camp and get into games, it's like they don't have that pop that they used to have, right? Where the biggest thing with hockey players is like you have to have such a well-rounded fitness to be a successful player, right? Like it's not just one thing that you need to be good at, right? You look at say like 100-meter sprinter, right? There's lots of people that, I don't know if it's as much anymore, but people would argue like, oh, hockey players should train like a sprinter, where it's like sprinters don't really have a very good aerobic energy system, right? So it's like, yeah, they can get out there and they can, be as fast as a gazelle for 10 seconds, but they can't do that repeatedly, right? And that's something that hockey players need to do. And that's where the aerobic energy system needs to come in. So, throughout a season, the kind of thing is like with your high minute guys, like they will maintain a good enough level of aerobic fitness through practices and games, for sure. No doubt about it, just from the stimulus that they get through that. Especially if practices and everything are well designed and focused to condition players at the appropriate periods and give them rest at the appropriate times, that type of thing. But yeah, this like the biggest part. And then when you have guys that are maybe playing a little bit less, lower minute guys, maybe guys that are getting scratched every once in a while, then you're going to have to maybe focus on them a little bit more and give them a little bit of a dose every once in a while to kind of maintain those levels of their aerobic fitness, just to kind of keep them up there, make sure that they are ready to go and able to recover when it is time for them to perform.
All right. So say we've got some youth parents or some high school coaches or college coaches out there listening in. What would you say to them to best develop that quality and finding the right element between strength training versus your cardio type training?
I think one of the biggest things, and it's like if we're talking about in season, again, it's going to depend a little bit on your schedule. So if you're a youth team that only has a handful of practices a week and maybe one game a week kind of thing like that, so you're not on the ice, you're not seeing the team every day, then it could be beneficial to throw a little bit of extra conditioning at players. And with in season, I typically like to use more of like aerobic power based intervals. So that would be an interval that's say 2 to 3 minutes long. I really like to use the assault bikes or the echo bikes, the fan, the arms move and everything like that. They're brutal. Most people know it. If you've tried them before, you know how painful it could be, but something that really allows you to get that heart rate up and keep it there. So, going hard for 2-3 minutes and then taking a minute and a half off and repeating that as an interval is something that's a very good stimulus for aerobic development. If we're looking at teams that are on the ice quite a bit more, I just say like putting a bit more thought into how you structure your practices and how you condition your players on the ice. I think that's one thing. It's like with a lot of coaches, especially in the kind of development world, like reaching out to fitness professionals that are around you and have the knowledge of the kind of sports science sides and getting them to help you out and help you not necessarily design your practices in sense of like the what you're doing out there for the players, like drills and everything like that, but just where your high day should be high and your low day should be low, and like kind of getting away from just the old bag skate, right? Like just kind of bag skating the players and trying to just be a little bit more
hide the bag skates, coaches. Hide those bag skates. We're doing tracking today.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing too. It's like if you have a team or if you have players that you want to get faster, driving them into the ground with a half an hour long bag skate, that's not how you're doing it, right? And that's like another thing that I've definitely tried to educate people on that have asked me about it and approached me about it, where if you're out and you're working your players really hard, whatever it is that you're doing, and you're expecting them to sprint and do anything in your type of bag skate scenario, whatever you're doing or whatever you think you're doing, it's most likely going to be an aerobic stimulus, right? So if you want to actually work on speed on the ice, you need to make sure that the players are getting ample recovery between efforts, right? And I think that's something that's just we always want to make good use of our time on the ice for good reason, because it's always expensive to rent it, but just a little bit more thought into how that's done. So like some days, if you want to have more of a speed focus, then you need to know, okay, like these players need to go 100% on every single rep, but they need to know at the same time that we're going to give them plenty of rest in between so that every rep after that has a very similar intensity, right? So that I think, trying to structure practices so they're focused on what you actually want to develop from an energy system standpoint is like a next step that a lot of coaches should take, right? Because I think that it would be very valuable just to put a little bit more thought into that side of it.
Okay, I love this. Let's keep going down this track. So we're talking about individual sessions, but how do we think about these sessions within maybe the structure of a week? So a lot of these people maybe are less NHL, but more college, idea based, where it's practice during the week, games on the weekend type. Like, how would you best properly structure that week? And how does that maybe have its place in a month and tied up a season? And obviously, you're trying to peak towards the end when playoffs and all that are on the line.
Yeah, and like that's kind of the world that I came from before I came on with the Oilers here, right? I was at the University of Alberta and working with both the men's and women's hockey teams there. So my like suggestion, going into, say, if you have a Friday, Saturday weekend, right, and you have practices on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right, you want to backload your week. So your Mondays and your Tuesdays should be your higher volume days and have some good intensity to them as well. So if it is a day where you want to really push them and you want to do potentially a little bit of conditioning skating at the end, or your bag skate, then Monday is probably going to be the day, right, where you get them out there for maybe a full hour, an hour and 15, and really push them hard on that day, right? And then Tuesday, Tuesday, Monday could probably be interchangeable depending on what you're focused on. But you maybe one of those days you want to have more of your battle or your one-on-one, two-on-two kind of small-sided game type of practice, right? And then moving on later in the week, that's maybe when you want to keep it really short, high-intensity efforts with lots of rest. And then that day before the game would just be like a very kind of relaxed intensity, not on the ice for very long, maybe working on more systems play, and everything's very, very low training stimulus, right? So that kind of thing is like you start high, taper off going into that Friday, and then they're ready for the game, high intensity on Friday and Saturday, right? And then again, in that college setting, oftentimes it's like if you had scratches, guys that aren't going to play on Friday, maybe if they're not playing both games, and that's your opportunity as a strength and conditioning coach to do extra conditioning off the ice to make sure they're getting whatever stimulus they might be missing from that game.
What about post game? Do you do anything post game? I know, like I remember seeing the Carolina Hurricanes. I forget the gentleman's name. He's basically Rod Brendamore after every home game. He's like, "Go see Bobby." Seems like a great guy. Every time I watch him, I'm killing myself on blanking his name, but like he's go see the trainer. Is it Billy?
Bill, yeah.
Billy, go see Billy. So what are your thoughts on that? Is Rod the Bod doing it right? I mean, obviously he looks absolutely stunning for like age 50. If I could ever look like that or even an ounce like that, I'd be doing something right. Holy smokes. So curious, is Billy doing it right down there?
Yeah, and well, like post game workouts, from what I understand, anyways, like there is a lot of teams that still do them, and we'll always have something set up post game for any guys that do want to come in, because there's always going to be guys that they're always looking for extra, right? And most teams are always going to have a handful of them, but one of the biggest things, and that's like a good argument for them in the NHL environment, is that time after the game is literally going to give you the most amount of recovery time prior to the next time they have to play, right? So it's like, hey, you can get this strength stimulus in, this power stimulus in, and then they're going to have, however much time to recover before their next one. Downsides to it is like, you're not getting an athlete in an ideal state to train at that point, right? Especially anybody that's played a lot of minutes, right? They're coming off, they're drained of energy, right? They probably used up all the calories that they put into their bodies during their pregame, and they're going to be dehydrated, all that kind of stuff, right? So most of the time it's not ideal, but again, there's arguments on either side, right? And I don't mind it, and some players prefer it, right? So it's like if the individual likes to do it and that's when they want to get their workout in, and chances are they're not going to get it in the practice day, then yeah, let them do it post game, right? So there's positives and negatives.
And then with that, how do you make sure you're not overtraining when you're doing that kind of stuff, or just even in general, just making sure we don't overtrain athletes? Because I mean, that's a massive problem. Like I know a lot of goalies that say they were going for a start and they got to start the next day. They go through their hydration the first game, even though they're not playing. So then they don't sweat it all out. And then they go through it again the second day. And you look at him, like, that guy looks bloated. And I know there's such thing as overhydration. So I'm curious about overtraining and how this all relates.
Yeah, like like overtraining just comes down to striking a balance between training load and recovery, right? So, in certain scenarios, say in the NHL environment, when you have like a really heavy schedule, right? If you're playing like back to backs, and if you have like a stretch of games where you're playing every second night technically, then it's like probably not a good time to run high intensity practices and have a whole bunch of workouts in there, right? So always trying to strike that balance between their training stimulus and their recovery, and in those times recovery becomes more important, right? Like you need to kind of stress that in a position like myself, and try to help those guys out, and just educate them on what they should be doing hydration wise, recovery methods, whatever that may be, like foam rolling, Normatec sleeves, whatever it is that they have at their disposal. And then there's ways of monitoring the athletes too, right? So looking at something like the acute to chronic workload ratio. So that's something where if you're tracking it and you're measuring training loads and practices and workouts and everything like that, you can look at it from an entire week, right? And so if you have a month of training, and say, for just giving you an arbitrary number, your training load average for the first 3 weeks is 1,500, and then for the fourth week you jump up to 3,000, then that's probably a recipe for some injuries to happen, right? So the biggest thing is, like, you don't want to drastically spike your workload at any point, because that is a time when you can run into overtraining type of issues, right? So trying to keep a load on the players that is ideal, that is something that gives them a good balance between their fitness and their fatigue, right? So in this world, that's what you're trying to manage, right? Is you're trying to boost up fitness, reduce fatigue as much as you possibly can. But with every stimulus that you put on an athlete, it comes with a certain level of fatigue. So it's just kind of the science of trying to balance it, right? So and the more tools you have at your disposal to kind of monitor guys and see where they're at, like jump monitoring is something that I did at the university with my athletes there, and weekly I'd have them jump on a jump mat, which just give me a number off of it, right? And every player had an average, and if they dipped significantly below their average, then it was like usually a conversation being like, hey, like, are you well rested? Like, you have like a lot of school stress at this time. Do we need to kind of back off a little bit this week and give you some more rest going into the games? That type of thing, right? And then here in the with the others, like, we use force plates, and they're basically, we're doing jump monitoring on them, but it's just giving us way more information off of every jump, and a bunch more metrics in terms of how they're jumping and that type of thing. So a lot of different ways that you can monitor fatigue, but it does just kind of come down to a balance of managing training load and recovery.
So you're doing jump mats and force plates. So are those your two KPIs? Are there anything else that you're managing? And also, just for my humor, why aren't you doing VO2 maxes in the middle of the season?
Yeah, so VO2's definitely not something, potentially with an injured player, if it's something that you wanted to check into, but you're looking at a test it's pretty stressful. Just in terms of the stimulus, and just like psychologically, it can be stressful for guys too. So probably not something that you want to throw at guys just randomly in the middle of the season. And it's another thing too. It's like, usually if you are managing training loads very well, and like, you have a good idea of like, okay, like how much certain guys are playing, if lower minute guys aren't playing as much, and you're giving them conditioning to kind of top them up, then it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to have them at a level where they need to be in terms of their aerobic fitness, right? So if you have a good eye for it, and a good read on everything that you're giving them, it's not something that you will need to do. But yeah, and in terms of KPIs, like, I'm a big supporter of on ice testing. I think it's something that more teams need to place value on, because like that's the thing. We're always looking how to get players faster, right? And you talk to certain players, like, I need to get faster in my first 3 steps, and coaches, parents will say that kind of thing all the time, but very few athletes have actually been on the ice and timed themselves in, say, a 30-meter sprint, right? So we would do it at the university, and it was always really interesting because I often bring up this example where, we had, a couple, like a handful of guys that very talented players, very important offensive players for the team, not always coming in and doing the best on the fitness testing, the off ice piece, right? Undersized guys, probably could have been a little bit stronger to help them out, but you get them on the ice and they blew everybody else out of the water, right? So what's the most important? Right? Am I worried about how much this kid can squat or bench press or, broad jump, or am I worried about how fast he can skate in a straight line or how quickly he can change direction on the ice? That's what's the most important. And we should be measuring that, right? So I think that, in terms of KPIs, that's what it comes down to, is like, what can these guys do on the ice? That's the biggest KPI. And again, that's not to diminish the importance of off ice testing and KPIs off the ice. I think your lower body power measures are where you get the best bang for your buck. And, again, that kind of depends on the types of tools that you have at your disposal. If you have force plates, they're great. A lot more people are getting them now because they are becoming more affordable. We have companies out there like Bald and Hawkins Dynamics that offer a pretty affordable option for them, and they're very user friendly. But even like in an environment that where you don't have a lot of resources, just something like a broad jump, all you need is a measuring tape for that, right? And that's an excellent test. You see them do it at the NFL Combine, they do it at the NHL Combine. It's a good test, and it'll give you a lot of information about how an athlete can generate power with their lower body. But I think with off ice KPIs, some of the big ones would be lower body power measures, however you can assess that in your situation.
And then what would be on the flip side of that? Maybe what are some tests that aren't so good or aren't really worth the squeeze?
I think some of the big tests that maybe aren't great are just the ones that aren't going to provide you with actionable information. And like I've seen some situations where players have went into and unfortunately, a lot of times, like with the training and the testing, some people have that idea of that philosophy that more is better, right? Let's just throw as many possible tests as we can at these athletes and see how they stack up, right? Where, I've seen athletes go into a testing situation where they've had to do 3 different tests that were all essentially measuring the same thing, right? So, I recently wrote an article on that SCAF website about fitness testing and kind of what I talked about, where you need to maximize the resources that you have available. You need to make sure that the tests you're using are reliable and valid, and then you need to make sure that they're repeatable. Repeatable being like, so say, I had a group of Bantam hockey players and I had the opportunity to take them, and they had just enough money to do VO2 max testing with everybody, right? That test isn't going to be repeatable. So say if somebody gets injured and I want to retest their aerobic fitness, I'm probably not going to be able to go back and pay another $150, $200 for them to do a VO2 max, right? You want to, in that case, like with the youth development, just run them through a beep test, right? There's nothing wrong with the good old beep test. Everybody, most people hate it, athletes included, right? But it's still a valuable test. There's a ton of research done on it. It's valid, it's reliable, it's easy to do. It's the kind of thing is that you need to match testing and assessments to your environment, right? What you have available to you, you need to kind of figure out what's going to give you the best bang for your buck. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a lot of like bad tests out there. There definitely could be, right? But it's like, it might be bad for your situation and your scenario, right? Figure out what your KPIs are, as the coach, and then measure those. Don't put in a bunch of extra stuff just to kind of make it hard on the players. I think that's something that, some people do, and they just need to get away from it.
KPIs, for everyone that don't know, key performance indicators. I don't think I defined that very well. Just went straight into lingo. So apologies on that, but thank you, Joel. That was excellent. Continuing down with training, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why we should specialize late in hockey. Why does everyone say it's a late specialization sport? So that'll be the first piece. And then maybe the second piece, or maybe where you start, is when should players really start to specialize in hockey?
Yeah, I think with the specialization piece, it's it's a point of contention with a lot of people, right? And um, I think it's tough to say. Like I feel that players that are probably in the area of 12, 13 years old, and there where you're kind of like getting into those Pee-wee bantam ages, then it's like you're probably going to want to specialize a little bit more, right? Leading up to that, the more of an athletic base that you have, the better it's going to serve you in the future. And whether that means that you're going to turn into a professional hockey player or a professional athlete in whatever sport, or if you're just, a regular Joe, just kind of, doing whatever it is that you have for your career, right? A better athletic base is going to set you up better, like later in life, right? And one of the biggest things is, learning how to move through, all different areas and fundamental movement skills is just going to help you, less chance of getting injured, right? And just staying more active throughout life. And I think with the unfortunate thing is that in Canada, it's kind of turning into a little bit of an elitist sport, where you have a lot of academies and everything like that, and it's tough to argue that the kids that are going to these academies they're given a great opportunity, whether it be through the coaching that they get and the off ice training that they have at their disposal, everything, right? But at the same time, it's like how many athletes are falling through the cracks there, that don't have the opportunity to do that. And I was looking at something recently where you look at a country like Norway, and their youth sport participation is like 93% or something like that, and then youth sport participation in Canada and the States is like 50-60%, right? So that there's a country that they're not spitting out NHL players, but that's more of a product of the hockey just not being one of the more popular sports, right? You look at how they perform at the Olympics, and they're a small country that just they can't even the gold medals are just flying into that country, right? So they're doing
they absolutely crush it at the Olympics. And then you look at just like, because I'm a nerd, I look at these things up. You just look at like health rates into adulthood, and they're just so much better than pretty much everyone else. Like it's quite amazing how great Norway is athletically, and then also just like general health due to like the foundational beast that they get.
Yeah, and like they're doing things like they keep the costs and like low for sports. They don't necessarily separate the more talented individuals from the less talented individuals until they get into like high school ages, and they just have like a better, like their adults are more active and everything, right? So they seem to have like a better system going in that area, right? And I think there's something to that. And the success that they have with some of those sports, I think it's a testament to that. And I just feel like the specialization, it's something that it's kind of going a little bit of the wrong way, where it's not necessary for those real young athletes, but everybody seems to have the mindset that you're missing out, or you're doing your kid a potential disservice if they're not playing the sport year round. But yeah, I think if we're looking at an age probably in that those Pee-wee bantam years where you could probably start to specialize a little bit more, but I still feel like having a more well-rounded kind of athletic background is the best possible thing for a player.
And then with that, are there certain issues that come with specializing early? Are you seeing hip issues? Are you seeing just like they've never used this muscle and now it's holding them back from doing X, Y, and Z?
Yeah. I think that's another big thing, right? Is the potential for injuries. And a big thing with hockey players is FAI. So femoral acetabular impingement is something that a lot of players are dealing with, fairly early in their lives as a hockey player. And I can't remember, there was a research study that came out, a few years back now, where they did an MRI on a pretty good chunk of kids that were all in kind of like the 18 to 20 years old range, that had played like a hockey for a good portion of their lives, and it was like over 90% of the players had this FAI, and it's not all of them were presenting symptoms of it, but there was. And basically what this is just an abnormal bony overgrowth, whether it's on the head of the femur or the acetabulum of the pelvis, and it can run into impingement issues. So, the hip problems are something that, is comes along with playing hockey. But like, I think a lot of it has to do with too many players specializing early and not giving themselves more of like a well-rounded athletic base, and playing other sports, that they're not stuck in the same movement patterns over and over and over again.
Awesome stuff here. Well, I've got two last issues that I think we need to cover here. Number one, nutrition. Anthony Donskov, I feel like he's the gold standard here, so maybe you can outdo him since he's a good buddy of yours. Nutrition. What should we know about, or what is maybe nutrition for dummies, for us mortal folks that are just trying to get by and move in the right direction?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things with nutrition is that everybody should follow like a habit-based nutrition model. And what I mean by that is just, try to practice good habits with your food intake, 90% of the time. Right. I can't remember if I'm pretty sure Anthony's done the same thing, but I've done a certification through Precision Nutrition, and it's one that's like a pretty well recognized nutrition company that's based out of Toronto, and they have 3 levels of athletes or clients that you could potentially work with. And basically what they say is that the overwhelming majority, 90% plus of people, are going to be level 1, and that just is based around like habits, good habits, just trying to eat right most of the time, not weighing your food and counting your macros and everything like that. Right. So like, and then the level 2 and 3, like those are, level 2 would be an athlete that needs to compete in a weight category sport. So something like MMA, wrestling, things like that, where they need to kind of, fluctuate their weight based on whatever category that they're in. And then a level 3 would be, like a bodybuilder or somebody going into a figure competition, or like a movie star that's getting paid to pack on 30 plus pounds of muscle or something like that. Right. So there's very few people that need to fall into those categories. And, one of the biggest reasons is that, treating your nutrition like that, it's like, it's not manageable. Right. And it's not really realistic to do that all the time. Like what I always kind of tell athletes that I've done nutrition talks for is trying to follow an 80-20 rule. And what I mean by that is just, 80% of the time you're eating clean, you're eating the right stuff, you're very conscious of what you're putting into your body. And then 20% of the time you let yourself cheat a little bit, right? Like, we're all human. Like, I always use the example of Dairy Queen, right? Like, I like to go to Dairy Queen every once in a while and get myself a Blizzard, and my whole family goes, but I'm not doing that 3-4 times a week, right? So it's just kind of picking your spots and just making sure that you're eating well most of the time, right? As hockey players, right? Trying to find good clean carbohydrates that you like and they agree with you when you eat them, right? So what if that's pasta for you, great. If it's rice, great. If it's sweet potato, great. Try to find the one that you prefer and makes you feel the best and gives you good energy, right? I think that's another thing, where just being conscious of what you're putting into your body and how it makes you feel. So if it's somebody out there that finds that they're having some issues, or they're bloated a lot of the time and they don't feel great, just try to track what you eat for a few days and write notes and just kind of like, try to find and tie in like what makes you feel good, what makes you feel not so good, and just be conscious of it.
If I remember correctly, Connor McDavid is known for having a sweet tooth from like candy. So thinking like gummy bears, so a lot of those hard candies, if I remember correctly. Am I wrong on that?
I can't remember him ever having candies. He's a pretty he keeps it pretty tight, so with his nutrition. So I don't see the guy eating candy too often.
Yeah, I forget it. Someone was they were doing like one of those roasting your fellow teammates, and it came up from a few of them like, yeah, if it's out, it's probably gone. You got to protect your candy around here. But I'm curious on this last one. I think it's going to be really, really cool for people is talking about the paper or the article, whatever you would call it, that you put out on stair conditioning for hockey players, because it's so fascinating how stair training can be powerful for hockey players. Ground contact time being a major piece of that. And I will let you take it from there because there's so much goodness in this, and I'd rather you tell it than be screwed up.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's something that, stairs are something that I really like to have in my own kind of personal fitness routine. And it's something that I've used extensively with players that I've trained in the past. So yeah, that's like the one so a very unique thing about hockey is that the ground contact time pattern when you're sprinting is the exact opposite of what it is when you run. So when you run, so say if you're watching somebody in a 100-meter sprint, when they start off, when they're accelerating out of blocks, their ground contact times are long, right? So as they start to pick up speed and they first get out, they have long ground contact times. And as they reach top speed, they have a lower ground contact. And all we mean by that is just like the amount of time that their foot is on the ground to generate force. So when they reach top speed, there's very, very small ground contact times, longer when they're accelerating. With a hockey player or a skater, it's the exact opposite. So when they're accelerating, their ground contact times are shorter. And then as they reach that kind of gliding full speed, that's when their ground contact times get longer. So they go from short to long, or sprinters go from long to short. And it's something that you can mirror on the stairs. So, it's something where, say if you're taking one stair at a time, your ground contact times are a bit shorter. You transition to 2 stairs at a time, you're getting a little bit longer, 3 stairs at a time, even longer, right? And with each one of those transitions, you're spending more time on the ground, but at the same time, you're generating more force and more power, very similar to how it is when you are skating. So, sprint work on the stairs, especially for, any players or any athletes out there that don't have a lot of access to the ice, especially in the off season, it's an excellent thing that you can use for your conditioning and your speed work. And, it's also like a really good combination of, energy system work and muscular endurance work where, you're kind of just doing repeatedly doing a step up on the stairs, right? And as you descend stairs, there's really good eccentric muscle work. So it's just a great bang for your buck exercise. A lot of great things that you can get out of it. And here in Edmonton, anyways, like we got a lot of really nice sets of stairs that kind of feed down into the river valley and get some nice views and get outside and get the sun. Shirt off if you want, right? It's a great way to exercise.
And what about like the range of motion as well?
Yeah, and that is another thing. So it's like if any of your listeners are interested in reading that article, you'll see some photos that I put on there and how like a side view of an athlete running on the stairs from one stair at a time. They're more upright. The knee drive isn't quite as high, very similar to what you would look like when you're first starting a sprint from a dead stop on the ice. And then as they reach that second and third stair, it's more of an aggressive torso lean, a higher knee drive. Again, exactly the same as what you're going to see when you reach more of a maximal speed when you're sprinting on the ice. So range of motion throughout the hip, knee, ankle is very similar to what you're going to see in skating.
Yeah, and then the last component would just be the lateral, if you want to go a little bit side to side rather than straight up.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's also another piece to this is adding that in there just to kind of get hockey-ish.
Yeah, definitely. Because like that, that kind of the unique thing about skating is that it's a combination of like a frontal and sagittal plane type of movement where, again, that's very hard to mimic with, you're not going to mimic that on a bike, not necessarily, just out for a run or anything like that. But if you're on the stairs, you can add that piece in where you do more of a little bit of a lateral bound up the stairs where it gives you a very similar planes of motion that you would see in skating. So, yeah, it's in terms of like the similarities that you can draw from skating. I can't think of too many other things that would do the same, right? Some people can use slide boards in the off season, which also have some good benefits to them as well. But yeah, just the stairs are going to give you a little bit less of an impact factor than what you would see on a slide board. And yeah, again, just a lot of good things that you can get out of it.
All right, so I think we need to brand Joel as the Stair Man. Gotta have good branding. I'm here to be your hype guy. Joel the Stairman Jackson. Let's go.
I like it. Got a good ring to it.
Yeah, no, obviously it's a super important thing, and I think Rocky, the movie, is completely on board with us here.
There you go.
Suddenly we're going to watch every single team in Pittsburgh suddenly running hills and running all the stairs. No incline for you guys. We're running. Too good. Well, Joel, anything that we missed or anything else you want to touch on here? This has been an awesome episode. Super excited to share this with everyone, and I'll make sure to put Joel in parentheses, the Stairman Jackson on the show notes.
Yeah, no, Greg, there's not nothing else that I can think of, but yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Any young strength and conditioning coaches out there, if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm on social media, Twitter and Instagram. My Twitter handle is Joel Jackson SC, and then my Instagram is Jackson_Joel. I think I got that right. But and then if anybody ever wants to email me as well, it's just jjackson@edmontonoilers.com. Yeah, that's I'm always happy to converse with people and interact. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And then for all those people that love to travel in the off seasons, I have to say, you should definitely add the Joel Jackson Community Weight Room if you're ever in the area of Snow Lake onto your itinerary. So Joel, Thank you so much for coming on. This was fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Greg.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch you beauts here next week for a brand new episode.